Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Sekulow.
Major terrorist attack in Turkey. This comes on the heels of another level of threat that John Brennan thinks will be aimed at the United States, including at airport facilities at the United States. This is our head of our CIA, so we'll get into some of that. We start the show with the virus of deception has infected the Obama administration, the State Department, and the Department of Justice. I say that because upon our review of the Benghazi report, it is clear that the president, his administration, Secretary Clinton lied, and they lied in multiple places in multiple ways. 2 of our officers were killed in Benghazi, actually 4, including when you add in Chris, the head of the Benghazi mission, the ambassador, Chris Stevens. Here's what happened. This intentional deploy of a false narrative became very relevant and very clear when they utilized this video line. Remember this famous line? We have the audio on this. The famous line about with this video, it was inspired by a video. This was not a pre-planned attack. I want you to listen to this opening.
This was not a pre-planned, premeditated attack. That what happened initially was it was a spontaneous reaction to what had just transpired in Cairo as a consequence of the video. So the video is completely false. There was an email from Hillary Clinton that night to Chelsea Clinton, her daughter, saying that this was an al-Qaeda-inspired attack. The next day, to the Egyptian Prime Minister, Hillary Clinton, we know that the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack, not a protest. 2 days later, Ben Rhodes, one of the heads of the Obama administration, especially in the policy issues, underscore that these protests are rooted in an internet video, this is what he tells Susan Rice, and not a broader failure of policy. Then, the diary entry of Charles Wood, the father of Tyrone Wood. I gave Hillary a hug, shook her hand, and she said, we're going to have the filmmaker arrested who was responsible for the death of my son. That narrative, completely and utterly false. And then, of course, the horrible tragedy with 41 dead, 239 injured in what looks like an ISIS-inspired or ISIS attack in Turkey. We'll talk about the ramifications of that as well. Turkey is a NATO partner. And by the way, Turkey had signed a resumption of its foreign policy relations, formal diplomatic relations with Israel yesterday, the day of the attack. We've got a lot more ahead, so stay tuned. Let me encourage you to sign on to our petition to stand against this radical jihadism. We need a concrete plan, a course of action to engage this enemy. You got to identify the enemy first. We're in a war with radical jihadists. We're in a war that is significant. We're in a war with people that are trying to destroy our way of life. We need Congress to act. We need the president to act. You can help us get there. Go to ACLJ.org. Sign the petition now to defeat ISIS. Or call us at 1-877-989-2255. That's ACLJ.org. Or 1-877-989-2255. Back with more in just a moment.
The Islamic State, ISIS, wants to destroy America and eradicate Christianity. Jihadists pledging allegiance to ISIS and radical Islam have attacked America, slaughtering dozens of Americans in multiple terrorist attacks. President Obama refuses to acknowledge the enemy. His administration has failed to protect us. ISIS is at war with us. We must wage war against ISIS. At the ACLJ, we've developed a critical 5-point strategy to defeat and destroy this jihadist enemy. We have 5 key steps to defeat ISIS. 1. Name the enemy, Islamic jihadists. 2. Fix our broken intelligence. 3. Ramp up undercover stings to smoke out jihadists at home. 4. Declare war on ISIS. And 5. Unleash full U.S. military might to utterly destroy ISIS. Stand with us. Add your name to our new petition right now. Call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255. Or add your name online, aclj.org.
we have a situation where I gave you the analysis, folks. I'm going to give it to you again. Hillary Clinton sends an email to her daughter the night of the attack saying it was an al-Qaeda-like group. That's number one. Number two, we know that the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack, not a protest. That's her email to the Egyptian prime minister the very next day. Yet on September 14th, 2 days later, 3 days after the attack, Ben Rhodes from the White House says, underscore that these protests are rooted, quote, in an internet video and not a broader failure of policy. Susan Rice then appears on the Sunday news programs and follows the Benghazi attacks were, in fact, sponsored by this video. So on and on it goes. We're joined right now by Congressman Mike Pompeo. Congressman, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it.
It's great to be with you today.
Give me your takeaway. Obviously, you issued a special report as well, but let's talk about your takeaway for the American people. Yesterday on the broadcast, we talked about the lack of military assets being deployed. Talk to me about the deception here of this video.
So from the very beginning, Secretary Clinton knew that this was a terror attack, almost certainly from Ansar al-Sharia, Islamic jihadists that raided a compound that she was responsible for. She knew that, but she told one story privately and one story publicly. She was telling her daughter, the Egyptians and the Libyans, that it was terror. And she told the American people for days and days and days that it was a protest in response to a video. Indeed, she said, what difference does it make? I think our report demonstrates it made a heck of a lot of difference to the men and women who were on the ground.
Let me ask you this. I try to figure out why would they come out with a narrative that ends up not only being proved false, but we've got an email or a summary of a conversation that Hillary Clinton had. It's in your report. To the Egyptian prime minister, we know that the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack, not a protest. Why would then Ben Rhodes to continue to put the false narrative out there about this being an internet video and have Susan Rice appear on the Sunday talk shows and do just that? Why in the world would they do that?
Susan Rice was put on the Sunday shows because she didn't know anything about what was going on in Benghazi, and they could brief her. And they did. They briefed her with two political people. They briefed her with Ben Rhodes and David Plouffe, senior Obama-Clinton political people. I think the reason they put this story out is very clear. It's consistent with this administration for years now. They want to deny that the war on terror is real. And they were 56 days out from a presidential election. And the narrative of Osama bin Laden being dead, GM being alive, and al-Qaeda being on the run was at the core of their campaign. And so the last thing they wanted was to go out and tell the American people 56 days out, hey, we've just had terrorists kill Americans. They wanted to delay and deny. And as you see now, they say, when the full report comes out, nothing to see here, folks.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting also in this one. We had Colonel Wes Smith on the broadcast yesterday. He's a senior advisor to the ACLJ. He was actually the chaplain in charge of the receiving of the bodies at Andrews Air Force Base, where Hillary Clinton and the president were, of course, present with the families. And he heard with his own ears. In fact, we have that. I'm going to play the sound for you, Congressman. This was the chaplain that was there talking about, and this we had him on radio yesterday, talking about what he heard Secretary Clinton say to the families.
They lied to the families, Jay, because I was there with the families. And Secretary Clinton said, we're going to get to the bottom of this and find out who made this video. And she talked to them about this video herself. Now she denies that. But in fact, she did.
So, Congressman, there we have the chaplain that was there. We have the diary from Charles Woods, father of Tyrone Woods. And I'm trying to figure out 3 days later, I'm Hillary Clinton. I get it that they're trying to make a political statement. But how in the world did they not think you all, and of course I guess they didn't think there'd be a Benghazi committee, would not catch this? But the American people have been lied to here, and we're calling this a virus of deception inside of this administration.
Well, there's no doubt the American people were deceived directly by President Obama and Secretary Clinton with respect to this. Look, I don't know what was in their head. I suspect they thought we wouldn't be dogged and determined and chase emails. Remember, at this point in time, most of those emails are on her private server. I suspect they thought we'd never figure that out and get to it, that they could block and deceive and deny, and that people would forget. I hope the American people won't forget that. My wife sat on the day of Hillary Clinton's testimony. She sat with the father of Charles Woods. She sat with him all day. And I think we did an enormous service to those families and to America by uncovering the fact that there was this enormous deceit. I hope the American people will hold accountable all those responsible for that deception.
Well, Congressman, I will tell you that the report in of itself is a phenomenal piece of work, and I've been litigating cases a long time, and you all did a great job. Let me turn our attention to the horrific terror attack yesterday in Turkey. You serve on the Intelligence Committee. Another reminder, very quickly here. Now, ISIS does not yet claim responsibility, but we have 41 dead, 239 injured. Friends of mine in Israel saying that next to Ben Gurion Airport, that the Turkish airport was probably the most secure in the world. We don't know if it's ISIS yet. What are you hearing?
So don't have any confirmation yet either, but I suspect when things are uncovered, we will find that this was another Islamist attack. Jihadists intent on the destruction of things that are valuable to the West. That airport is a central corridor between Asia and Europe, and indeed does have enormous security. It's one more incident added to the pile from Turkey now to Orlando to San Bernardino, back to Fort Hood. This series of Islamist violence, frankly, all the way back to Benghazi, Libya, now almost 4 years ago, where terrorists have taken on the West, and this administration has done nothing to defeat it where it grows.
So, Congressman, last question here for you, and that is the administration claiming that ISIS is losing some territory inside of Syria and Iraq, that they're in the sense imploding a little bit, but it does not take much of ISIS left to do these horrific acts. What does the administration need to be doing to really engage this enemy? Maybe naming the enemy be the first thing they should do, but what is the process here, in your view?
Addressing and understanding that we're at war and that they're at war with us and it's inescapable, we can't just walk away from it, is a very good start. But then it takes a concerted effort, military for sure, but political and diplomatic as well. But when you have Secretary Kerry out saying, gosh, this is a desperate act, when we all know that that's not the truth, this is not an act of desperation. We may have taken some real estate back from ISIS on the ground in Iraq and Syria, but they're continuing to extend their tentacles into the West, into Europe, and into North Africa. They are not on the run. They are not JV, and we need to own that and be serious about defeating it.
Congressman Mike Pompeo, thank you for being with us. Thank you for your leadership on this issue. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much, sir. Have a good day.
Yes, sir. Than Bennett, our Director of Governmental Affairs, we've got a 5-point plan out. We're going to be talking a little bit more about that later, but one of those is making sure that we do call this enemy an enemy. And I think, and I'm going to play the John McCain bite, actually, because it's fascinating here that everybody's starting to say we got to act like we're at war with ISIS. Whether it's an authorization for a military engagement, the formal authorization, or whichever form it takes, an acknowledgement that we're at war with them. Here's what John McCain said today, Senator McCain.
I think there's one fundamental here. We're either going to kill them there or we're going to kill them in places like Istanbul or San Bernardino or Orlando or Paris. That's what you're going to kill them one of those two places.
So it's either get them there or they're going to come here. And we've got John Brennan saying today that, in fact, they expect here in the United States, Stan, this kind of attack that we saw yesterday in Turkey at a very secure airport come into play here.
Well, it comes back to what Congressman Mike Pompeo just closed with, Jay. Do you believe that ISIS is growing or do you believe that they're receding? And I would just point out San Bernardino, Orlando, Istanbul. It is very clear that they are growing, and we are going to have to fight them, whether it's here or abroad. Jay, this is a conversation with the Hill that we are having each and every day. It is time for them to step in and fill the void that this president has created. Clearly, there is a war going on. The only question that remains for the United States is, will we acknowledge the war that is taking place? We are going to have to do that, Jay, if we are going to have any hope at winning it. I think there is a resolve growing on the Hill. You heard it there from Congressman Pompeo, but we still have some work to do. We've got to fill the void that this president has created.
I'm going to go ahead and take some phone calls here. I'll take at least one call before the break. Let's do this. Let's go to James, who's calling from San Antonio, Texas.
My question is, how come the parents of the Marines in Benghazi have not filed a lawsuit against Hillary Clinton?
Because there's sovereign immunity. That's the reason. You cannot sue the administration that way. Let me tell you what we have done, though. This is important. We're going to talk about this in the second half hour of the broadcast. We have filed a lawsuit, though, James, by the American Center for Law and Justice against the United States Department of State for their continual lying and misrepresentation of the whole transaction with Iran, which, by the way, is fueling a lot of this. Believe me, this terrorism that we're seeing is being fueled by a lot by Iran. Not insignificant. This is the largest state sponsor of terror, and the American people were lied to. We're calling it a virus of deception because that's what it is. So we did take action, and we filed a suit. That's what we could do. All right, we've got a lot more to come up. I'm glad we were joined by Congressman Mike Pompeo. We're going to take more of your calls at 1-800-684-3110. If you go to ACLJ.org right now, we've got a petition up, Defeat ISIS and Islamic Jihadists. We have a 5-point plan. You know about it. Hundreds of thousands of you have read it. We encourage you to take a look at it and get more familiar. If you haven't signed that petition, 74,000 have. Then it'd be good to get that up to 100,000 in the next week, correct? As we really start pushing on this.
Oh, it's going to be fundamental. We got to make sure the American people don't lose track of this, Jay, because it's going to be them that pushes Congress to action.
We've got a lot more ahead, including your calls and comments. But let me say this. We're also going to be joined by a panel of experts. We need your support. We need to defeat ISIS. We have a 5-point plan that we've put forward in Congress. It is gaining a lot of traction. If you want to end this terrorism and have a concrete action by the United States to stop this terrorism, I'm going to urge you to go to aclj.org or call us at 1-877-989-2255. Sign that petition. Take action now. We don't have a moment to lose.
The Islamic State, ISIS, wants to destroy America and eradicate Christianity. Jihadists pledging allegiance to ISIS and radical Islam have attacked America, slaughtering dozens of Americans in multiple terrorist attacks. President Obama refuses to acknowledge the enemy. His administration has failed to protect us. ISIS is at war with us. We must wage war against ISIS. At the ACLJ, we've developed a critical 5-point strategy to defeat and destroy this jihadist enemy. We have 5 key steps to defeat ISIS. 1. Name the enemy, Islamic jihadists. 2. Fix our broken intelligence. 3. Ramp up undercover stings to smoke out jihadists at home. 4. Declare war on ISIS. And 5. Unleash full U.S. military might to utterly destroy ISIS. Stand with us. Add your name to our new petition right now. Call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or add your name online, aclj.org.
We were talking about what has happened in the Benghazi report, where the narrative is completely false that the administration gave. Then I want to look at where we are politically right now. What is the ramifications of this? We got presidential campaigns that are geared up. You've got the situation in Turkey. Then you got this Benghazi report, the liberal media saying, oh, it doesn't matter. And we're pointing out to where Hillary Clinton lied for it, and the whole deception program of the Obama administration was going on for weeks.
Yeah, there's no other response, Jay, other than that this is climbing the ladder of important issues for this election. I think it should be all the way at the top. Listen, think about this. The 2 largest terror attacks on U.S. soil since 9/11, Jay, both of them have happened in the first half of 2016. Both of them were carried out by Islamic jihadists, and yet our commander-in-chief, our administration, continues to insist that the proper response to those 2 attacks, and by the way, a litany of other smaller ones that have happened around the world, is to label those who would look at the motivation of these attackers as bigots. That cannot happen, Jay, and if it continues to happen, if our next president continues to double down on this foreign policy, on this method of attacking this, we will continue to lose, and this threat of terror will continue to grow. So this has to be the number 1 issue in the fall, in my opinion.
All right, I've got Skip Asher, Senior Counsel for the ACLJ, on, who is also in charge of our national security practice. We have a terrorist attack in Turkey. The Israelis were on air yesterday saying Turkey's the second most secure airport behind Ben Gurion. Also yesterday, and you're not going to hear this in many places, folks, Israel and Turkey reestablished formal diplomatic relationships yesterday, the same day that this attack takes place. Skip, your analysis of this.
Well, my analysis is that this is probably an ISIS attack, that ISIS was aware of the fact that Turkey and Israel were going to reestablish relations, which they opposed, and I think they used this as a method of sending a message not only to Erdogan and his people in Turkey that this is unacceptable and that they are not extreme enough. Remember that President Erdogan is already a very radical Islamist, that he is a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood, and yet ISIS considers him too moderate for their taste, and therefore they're bringing the war to him, and that's going to have an impact on Turkey. And 80%, there was a poll recently, 80% of the Turkish population has some sympathy with ISIS and its goals. And therefore, we can expect more of this even in Turkey, and it's going to spread to Western Europe and to the United States.
I want everybody to hear what Skip just said. 80% of the population of Turkey has at least some type level of support for what ISIS is doing. So Erdogan, who is an Islamist, feels he's being threatened by the other caliphate because he really wants to be the caliphate. Now, they're also a NATO partner here. But, Skip, I want to underscore something here I think is very important for people to understand. You don't think it was coincidence that the formal reestablishment of diplomatic relationships between Israel and Turkey took place yesterday?
I do not. It has been rumored in the press for the last week or so that this was going to take place. There would be a formal recognition of the fact that Israel and Turkey were going to reestablish full diplomatic relations, and I think that gave ISIS the opportunity to plan to send a message on the very day that happened that they are opposed to the regime in Turkey.
Yeah, I think this is the nature of what we've got. Let's take another phone call here. Let's go to Marcus, who's calling in San Diego, California, on line 5. Hi, Marcus.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Yesterday, all day long on the radio and on TV, the media was saying the Obama administration did very little to help. And I yelled at the radio saying very little, they did nothing. And then later I thought, well, they didn't even do, they did worse than that. They hindered and made it better for the, the terrorists to do what they did.
Well, they did, look, they did something. They lied. But Skip, we have talked about this. I want to get Skip and Than on this because you raised a very important point. And that is this deception is also part of the reason they bring out these false narratives. Their whole idea of engaging jihadists has failed, and it's failed miserably now for 8 years.
Exactly right. They're relying on political correctness. They have a view of the way the world they would like it to be, and they have looked out and they see the world that way despite what their own eyes see, and that is the world is exactly the opposite of what they're saying it is. So they are deceiving themselves at the cost of the American people, and lives are being shed because of that viewpoint and their unrecognition of reality.
I'm going to play for everybody right now a message. This was a statement from Representative Trey Gowdy yesterday. His biggest takeaway is exactly what we've been saying. Take a listen.
The biggest takeaway for me, and everyone's going to have to make up their own mind, is this 2-hour White House meeting from 7:30 p.m. until 9:30 p.m. Keep in mind, in Benghazi, our guys are still getting shot at, and this is after Panetta has issued his order. There's a 2-hour meeting, which the Secretary participated in. Read the summaries of that 2-hour meeting. Read the readouts of what came out of that 2-hour meeting. That was when the decision was made not to go to Benghazi, but to go to Tripoli. That is when all the concern was expressed about hurting the Libyan feelings by showing up in uniform.
So it is very clear, Than, that what we have is a complete false narrative, or as Harry Hutchinson has said, a virus of deception that has infected the State Department and I believe the Obama administration as well. I gave the narrative of the timeline on this. I'm going to go through that again in the next half hour of the broadcast. But the fact is this level of deception, but here's what the American people are asking, Than, what can we now do? We've got the report, now what?
Well, Jay, first of all, people have to understand that false narrative started while these two Americans were on the roof of that compound taking fire. Let me just read you 2 quotes very quickly from this report that came out of that White House meeting. First of all, they said, if any deployment is made, and then they issued a list of action items that were half of them were based around the YouTube video. So, Jay, while our Americans were under fire, they were trying to decide whether or not to go to their aid, and we know that they ultimately decided they did not. What can be done about it? There is going to be a piece of legislation that comes out of this report that mandates changes in how training is done. We've talked about that a lot, as well as who can make the commands to go to the aid of one of our soldiers who is under fire. I think that kind of legislation is where Congress needs to move, and I expect we will see it in the next few weeks.
By the way, Lou on Facebook just said, how do we fight the lies and manipulation of our own government? Well, Than just laid out how we're going to do it, but let me add something else to you. For those who are watching on TV or watching on the Facebook or Periscope or ACLJ.org or you're listening to us on radio, here it is. This is a federal lawsuit. American Center for Law and Justice versus the United States Department of State. We've sued the State Department because of their manipulation and lies on the whole transaction with Iran, the largest state sponsor of terror. We have just sent out, are working on right now, another lawsuit or FOIA request on the issue of who's deleting the words Islamist, jihadist, Sharia from the training manuals. When you don't identify the enemy, guess what? The enemy goes to Turkey or goes to Orlando, goes to San Bernardino, Fort Hood, Chattanooga, New York City, Washington, D.C., or Shanksville, Pennsylvania. They've got to be stopped. We're in a war. We don't want to recognize it, but that's the reality of what we've got. But we don't have to just sit and take it. We can fight back in the halls of Congress. We can fight back with our vote. We can fight back in the halls, in the courtrooms around America, and we're doing just that. Anthony's calling from New York City. Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, how are you?
Yes, sir.
One more thing I want to mention. A few days ago, the president of Turkey, Erdogan, apologized, and this was reported
to Russia.
Apologized to Russia.
Right.
Russia accepted the apology, and today it seems like they're mending ties. Russia obviously is a nightmare for ISIS. So I was just going to say that might also be a possible trigger.
I think that's a fair thing. I think that's being discussed right now in Washington. That well could be. I think it's part of the fact the ISIS attack yesterday in Turkey was ISIS is not happy with Turkey, period, but also that they formally reestablished their diplomatic relationship with Israel yesterday, the day of the attack. Hamas isn't happy about it. ISIS isn't happy about it. Dan?
I think that's the larger of the two factors, Jay. They are against anything that advances the standards of the West. That includes Israel, and reestablishing those ties, I think, was the factor. But I will say this, an emergence of Russia and a muscular Putin in the region, they are going to be the leader that steps into this void. Yep. That also factors in here, Jay. He's absolutely right.
There's no doubt about it. I've got a book coming out in the fall called Unholy Alliance, Russia, Iran, and the jihadists. And while they don't want the jihadists, because it interferes with Russia, they'll use them. In fact, this is not the first time this has happened. Let me just put it that way. If you look at the Israeli conflicts with the Arab world, Russia, it was always a proxy war between the United States and Russia, most of the time. Well, that's going to do it for a very important broadcast today. Let me encourage you to take some direct action here. We've heard from a lot of you, tens of thousands of you. We need a concrete plan to end these radical jihadists who are bent on one thing, the destruction of Israel and the destruction of the West. We need to take action for the sake of our children and our children's children. Go to aclj.org right now or call us at 1-877-989-2255. Tell the operator you're going to sign the petition. aclj.org. That's aclj.org or 1-877-989-2255. We'll talk to you next week.
The Islamic State, ISIS, wants to destroy America and eradicate Christianity. Jihadists pledging allegiance to ISIS and radical Islam have attacked America, slaughtering dozens of Americans in multiple terrorist attacks. President Obama refuses to acknowledge the enemy. His administration has failed to protect us. ISIS is at war with us. We must wage war against ISIS. At the ACLJ, we've developed a critical 5-point strategy to defeat and destroy this jihadist enemy. We have 5 key steps to defeat ISIS. 1. Name the enemy, Islamic jihadists. 2. Fix our broken intelligence. 3. Ramp up undercover stings to smoke out jihadists at home. 4. Declare war on ISIS. And 5. Unleash full U.S. military might to utterly destroy ISIS. Stand with us. Add your name to our new petition right now. Call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255. Or add your name online, aclj.org.